Hello and welcome to the scientific calculator video, which will help you to get familiar with the different types of settings and the modes in your scientific calculator. In this video, we're going to look at how many different types of modes and which kind of settings are in the scientific calculator and which one to use when. Before we go into that though, I would like to draw your attention to the calculator manual or the user's guide. It's always very useful to have it for your own calculator. However, if you bought your calculator many years ago and you've already lost the user guide, what you can do is just type in the calculator's make, which is always here at the top, into Google, and somewhere you will definitely find the PDF version of the user manual guide. Okay, so turn on the calculator. And then what we're going to do now, we're going to look at the different types of modes. So where is the mode? Well, the mode button is just right next to the on button. When you press this, 4 different modes will turn up. Now don't worry about 3 and 4, the table and the verif. That's not something that you need to be using. The 2 important modes are the comp and the stats. One is the computation, so that's the mode that you want to use for every time you want to do mathematical calculations. And 2 is the statistical mode, which is what you're going to use when you want to carry out statistical calculations, on which I have a separate video. Okay, so far so good. There are just 2 important modes that you need to know about. However, there are quite a lot of different setup options. So where do you find the setup options? Well, next to the mode in yellow is written setup, and remember that any function in yellow, if you want to call them, you need to press shift and then that particular button. So what we've got here, quite a few different setup modes. Well, the first one, MTHIO, is the mathematical input output. So every time you want to carry out mathematical calculation, press this one. And then what you want is math 0, line 0. Let's see what's the difference between them. Press 1 and then try to put numbers in there. Let's say 5/8. You've got this, and then you've got the decimal equivalent. So if I go back there, press 1 and then press 2, what will be the difference? Now in this particular case, it's straight away giving you the linear options, okay? And then you can change from the linear into the fractional. In the previous one, you had the fraction first and then you changed into linear, okay? Depending on what your preference is, doesn't really make so much of a difference. Let's go back. And what is setting 2? Setting 2 is line input output. Now if you put the line input output there and then use the very same fraction, 5/8, you've got that straight away. But if you press the SD button, what you see now is 5 and that funny angle looking symbol, which is the linear version of noting that this is a fraction. I don't like this notation at all because in most cases it confuses me. So whenever I need to do mathematical calculations, I use the mathematical input output, which is setting 1. And I also prefer to see the fraction format, so I'm usually setting my calculator to first as a fraction format. Just simply because mathematicians like exact answers and fractions are always more exact than decimals. So that was the first 2 settings. Let's look at what other settings are there. Well, if you look at 3, 4 and 5, they are degrees, radians and gradients. These are the different measurements for angles. Now in most cases, unless you're doing mathematics or some scientific subjects, you're only going to use the degree setting, which is number 3. Now that little D here is telling me that I am the degree setting. If I change that into the radian, that changes to R. And if I change that into the gradient, that changes to G. Okay, let's get back to degree. So that is the first 5 settings. Now let's look at what is the next setting, which is 6, says fix. Now I have got an option to choose between 0 and 9. Let's choose randomly 5. So what you see that on the screen, now you have a fix written in there. Now the fix is basically giving you a fixed output, and all of the calculations, any calculations that you do from now on in this setting will be rounded to that many decimal places. So let's look at the calculation. Let's say I wanted to calculate 1 divided by 3. That's a third, and if I press this one, that shows me it's 3 recurring infinitely, and if I press that again, that is giving me the rounded answer for this to 5 decimal places. Okay, let's come out from this setting so we can look at a different one. Let's look at setting 7. Okay, again, scientific also gives us a 0 to 9. Let's go for a different one. Let's go for 9 this case. Okay, now we have got 1/3 again. It's the same number that I already had there. But what's going to happen now if I press the SD button? After the second pressing of the SD button, what happened here now is that I ended up with the scientific notation. And the 9 I pressed is telling the calculator that from now on every single number have to have 9 significant figures. Also, if you look at the calculator, you can see the SCI turning up there. Previously it was fixed, now it's SCI, so it's telling you that you are in the scientific notation. Okay, just a little bit of a recap. If you're not sure what the scientific notation is, it's basically you're multiplying a number between 1 and 10 by a power of 10. So that's why we got 3.333, because we identified 9 significant figures, and 10 to the minus 1 because it was 0.333. Okay, let's look at the next setup. 8, norm. Now again, you have got a choice of having 1 or 2. If I press 1 and I type in 1 divided by 200, what do I end up with? 5 times 10 to the minus 3. Well, that is not very useful to see because it's already changing it into power notation. Let's see what norm 2 gives me. The very same number, I can now write it as 0.005. So the norm is the exponential display range, and out of the 2 options you should have norm 2 because that's the bigger range. Sometimes if you have a calculations ending up with the unexpected scientific notation but without the SCI sign on the screen, then it's probably your calculator in norm 1 instead of norm 2. Okay, let's have a look at again the setups. Seemingly we have looked at every one of the setups. However, if you press the down button, a few more options turn up. Now, 1 A, B over C is basically giving you the option to have the answers to calculations as a mixed fractions. So for example, if I wanted to do something like 8 over 3, the default answer will be 2 and 2/3, which is a mixed fraction of whole numbers and fractions. Then I would be able to change it between the fractional and the decimal answers. Don't forget that this type of calculator, the FX85 GT Plus, has got this built-in function where the dot on top of a number indicates that the 6 is recurring infinitely. For some people finds that annoying. It's not a big difference, it's just mathematically more exact. Okay, let's go back to settings again, and if I choose 2 here, then the 8 divided by 3 gives me the 8 over 3, and then again the same decimal changes. I personally prefer this sort of final answer, but this is a personal preference. So if you prefer the mixed fractions, go for setting 1. I usually go for setting 2. Go back again. Here setting 3 sets stats. Now we already had a mode of stat, but now having a setting of stats. So what that might be? Well, this is the place where you can turn the frequency column in your statistics mode on or off. Now, depending on what kind of data set you work, having the frequency on or not can be useful, but in some cases it's just an extra column that you don't necessarily use. I usually don't use the frequency column because I don't work with huge data sets, but if you do carry out statistical calculation often, it's very useful to have this frequency on. So at this moment, I'm just going to turn it off. Then I have got display number 5, which is helping you to change between the decimal dot and the decimal comma. While in Europe, people use comma to separate whole numbers from decimal fractions, but in the UK we use the dot to separate decimal fractions from whole numbers. So you always have to set your calculator into setting 1 in here. And the last setup was cont, which is basically helping you to adjust the contrast of the display. So I never touched this setting, but if people have got difficulties to seeing the display, they can set the contrast between the background and the writing on the screen to their personal preference. So these are all the settings that you have. One thing you need to remember, that once you set a setting, even if you turn the calculator off and you turn it back on again, that settings stays. So it's a good idea that if you use a calculator in a different setting for one particular purpose, that you turn it back onto the original setting. So when you turn the calculator back on again, you don't have to scratch your head how to get out from that setting and why your numbers don't look as you expect them. So this was a very short video about the different modes and setups. I hope it's going to help you, and see you in the next video.